How's it going, everybody? This is Jason Ostrowski, and welcome to another episode of the Everything Real Estate Podcast. It's already warming up outside, and we're already in the beginning stages of our 2025 spring market. And today, we're here to help you ace your next listing appointment by discussing some compelling listing strategies to win you more listings this spring. And to help break it all down, I'm joined by an absolute powerhouse in the real estate industry. His name is Chris Twardy, team leader of the Tri-State Real Estate Group based out of our Mount Laurel office. Chris and his team are consistent top producers, earning Chairman's Circle Diamond honors for 2024, and they're no strangers to selling hundreds of homes each year. If there's anyone who knows how to position a home to sell quickly and for top dollar, it's Chris. We'll be covering everything from pricing strategies and marketing tactics to the little details that make a listing stand out. So let's get right into the episode with this week's guest, Chris Twardy. Chris, how's this warm weather treating you so far?
Well, it's good. Now we're in a 60-degree weather, no longer 20 degrees here over New Jersey.
Yeah, no kidding, right? So the winter months and therefore my seasonal affective disorder are slowly dissipating as the spring market comes around. And with the spring market, most of us will hopefully be going on some listing appointments shortly, which is where our conversation today comes in. So we're here to talk about compelling listing strategies and some out-of-the-box thinking when it comes to listing properties. And Chris, your track record speaks for itself. So we'd like to pick your brain a little bit today and get your take on what makes for compelling listing strategies that work for you and your team's business. So to get us started, my first question, if I can, is how have you adapted your listing presentation strategy to meet the evolving demands of the 2025 real estate market?
So first thing, after getting over that Eagles hangover with the Super Bowl winner, now everybody, I guess, is get back to work with the spring market coming. So at this point, there's been a lot we've kind of implemented over the last, not only this year, but the last couple of years. Obviously went through the pandemic that kind of changed the market in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Obviously, New Jersey was deemed a necessity where you're essential. Over Pennsylvania is a little different. How I know you, Jay, operate business a little differently. We kind of work around those rules where sellers were kind of showing buyers properties for us for a while. But on that avenue, the listing strategy now, a lot of times you do stuff through Zoom when somebody's out of the area. So we have a seller who's not living in the area. They might be an investor or they moved out west at some point or down south. A lot of times you are doing listing presentations through Zoom now, Google Meet. Some people even want to go other routes of Snapchat or WhatsApp or whatever there is. So it's kind of implementing that technology base into your listing has kind of been a change for the future. And I see it being there for the foreseeable future. Definitely one way on the listing side that we kind of adapt our listing presentation, but it's really implementing technology into that listing presentation now.
Yeah, so much of what we do is tech-based now, and it seems like every day something is shifting. And I know Rajiv is out there with the AI stuff in the forefront now. And it's almost like when we got into the business, when we first got into the business, both of us grew up in the real estate business and kind of seeing how business was done, say 15, 20 years ago, as opposed to what it is today. It's amazing that those agents can now keep up to where we are today, implementing the strategies that we have. But like you said, the pandemic really changed everything. So with that said, how about ChatGPT for you, AI? Do you incorporate that at all in your listing presentations at this point?
So it's funny you mentioned avenues like that because, like you mentioned, years ago, things changed. A lot of agents nowadays don't even realize that years ago they had the MLS book, and that would come out every 2 weeks. So that was the big technology implementation at that time, where it would take properties, it would generate usually weeks to even a month to start gaining traffic, so agents would realize that your house was out there available to be seen. But now at this point, a lot of our listings, when we're taking these listings, our assistants and admins are acquiring any upgrades of the house at any point over the last 10 years that sellers have lived there, just to implement that strategy into a ChatGPT, so you can kind of rewrite listing descriptions and then tweak them at the end. There's so many different avenues that we utilize that, whether it's just for a listing presentation, social media posts, updating avenues on our website. anything we can utilize technology to get a base and take any sort of implementation to advantage for the sellers is something that we really take into consideration.
So, for instance, I list a property last week, and you had mentioned social media and marketing wise, and we can get into this further. But I'm also going on ChatGPT now and asking for trending hashtags when it comes to actually listing the property, and I can employ them, and show my sellers that it's the traction is doing a lot better than it would be if I was doing it myself, right? I can use those to my advantage, and that's something in a listing presentation that I'm showing my sellers right now, and why that's important. And so, getting into my next question, can you share any innovative? We talk about innovation, and that being one of them. Can you share any innovating pricing techniques or different strategies that you've implemented on your listings that have worked well for you and your sellers in this market?
So, I mean, look, when you're going in to list a property, obviously I always say and look at it that there's 4 avenues when to list a property for sale. Obviously, pricing is number one. It comes out of price, condition, location, and time of year. And we see when we're looking at time of year, as a property when you're listing in spring and summer, usually sells for 5% more than a property you're listing in the fall and winter. So to me, it always comes down to pricing, even more importantly, those off times of the year with real estate. And look, there's instances where you have a client, they like to go a little bit higher to see if they can garnish that number because the market's done very well over the last couple of years. But per se, there's got to be a time frame set in stone, and we usually like to use anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks. If you're not getting the traffic you want, a lot of times we're drawing that property off the market for a day or two, relisting it, coming out with a new price, because it kind of resets the days on market back to 1. You know what I mean? And at that point, when we're able to do that, it kind of gets fresh eyes. A lot of times what it also does is, in addition to getting those fresh eyes from these buyers, it opens up to buyers in a new price point. So if you're seeing somebody in this instance that lists their house and says, hey, we want to try listing our house at 420, and after 2-3 weeks, it's not getting that traction. Once we relist and go that avenue of 399, then at that point, it opens up to a whole nother avenue of buyers.
When it comes to pricing, and you had mentioned seasonality and the difference in pricing based on the time of the year, right? And you're sitting down with your sellers, you're talking about where they should be price-wise. How do you get your sellers to trust you and your strategy? Because I had an interesting conversation with a seller of mine who had a brother-in-law that was in mortgages and was giving some really bad advice. And I'm politely pushing back, right, on this brother-in-law who I wanted to strangle, quite honestly. But how do you get your people to trust what you do?
Well, to use the example you just presented, I mean, look, when you're the area of expertise, I always defer to that person. So if I'm a buyer and I'm coming to somebody in mortgages, yes, you as a real estate agent have general mortgage knowledge, but you're not the mortgage expert. Same thing with title, homeowners insurance, and so on and so forth. So that's usually the first thing I bring up right away is, look, I can come to you and speak on the mortgage market, but are you going to listen to me? I'm not a lender. So in that avenue, when I kind of nip in the bud right from the beginning, it kind of puts the hammer between the foot right with the seller. So they realize in this instance, oh, you want to know what? He's right. So look, understand it's family and their friends and they're looking out for their best interest. But at the end of the day, unless somebody's buying cash, the numbers don't lie. House has to appraise.
I'm kind of chuckling because everything that you just said is exactly. Now, you and I did not talk before this podcast about this, but you basically mentioned every single thing almost verbatim to what I said to this person. And she did trust me, and she ended up going with my pricing strategy, right? Another thing that I like to do just personally is I bring a list of my recently sold properties listing wise and what they originally listed for and what they sold for and how much we average over the original listing price. Because again, we're talking about proof is in the pudding type things that you can bring to your sellers. So, I want to know, because looking at your website, you do some really unique things when it comes to marketing approaches for your listing. So what unique marketing approaches have you found effective in distinguishing your listing from your competitors?
So one of the things is obviously what's really big right now is listing showcase on Zillow. That's a big thing that's out there right now. Fortunate enough, we're one of the 5% of real estate agents in the country that has access to that. So that's one thing we can kind of put in either foot that really presents, because a lot of consumers feel that, yeah, I mean, that's like I always say, Zillow's a great starting point for a buyer. It's not the end all be all. Some sellers feel a different way. Yeah, I mean, the first thing they're going to do is say, hey, what is my house? What's the estimate in my house? Or, you know what I mean, what's the traffic that it's getting on Zillow? So when we have a certain seller that really that's an end all feature for them, we can show them, look, in this instance, if our zip code's Mount Laurel, if you're looking in 08054 and you're looking for a home to purchase, we can pull it up and show in this avenue, out of all the listings for sale in Mount Laurel, only 3, 4, however many have listing showcase, so they're getting more traffic, more attention. Okay, that's one avenue. Another avenue is when we have a massive email database, you know what I mean, throughout all sorts of different price ranges. That's another avenue that we have access over a lot of other teams, because in this instance, when you're able to drop, you know what I mean, a listing to 100,000 people, you're going to get somebody that comes back and has some sort of interest.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you had mentioned on your website, which I found very intriguing, that, you know, talk about the sold in 29 days or you'll pay the difference. Can you mention something about that that's on your website?
So traditionally, we have that set in there for the individual that is tight on time. So you might have a certain individual who says, look, I'm not sure if I'm going to sell my house open market. I don't know if I want to sell cash to an investor. Once we break down the avenues of the differences, because if you're selling open market, you're always going to get the most money. When you're dealing strictly off market to a cash investor, a lot of times they're going to want a substantial discount. Yes, they'll buy the property as is, no inspections, no appraisals, usually get certificate occupancy, anything along those lines, close out any existing permits, but it's going to be a less compensation to the seller.
Sure.
So when you mention the 29 days, it usually comes out of the fact is the number that we give for a recommendation on 100% selling that house in 29 days. But a lot of times in this instance, we go back to it, the seller wants to get as much value as possible.
Do you find that giving you traction at all? I mean, does that get your foot in the door? Let's just say, you know, I don't want to call it a gimmick, but I'm saying, like, do you find that gets your foot in the door with certain clientele?
Maybe to an extent. I think what more gets us in our foot in the door is how we market, per se. One, to gain, always having new incoming clients, one, but also in how we're marketing, on how we're selling clients houses, but also at the same time, how we're able to have a database that we can market to as well. It's substantial.
Yeah, and the other thing that I wanted to mention that I really liked was the military and first responder discount. And
Yes.
so, you know, I could see that definitely having some traction to it. So can you talk about how that came to be as well?
So we had that sit in there, that kind of something we wanted to give back during the pandemic, because we felt that we were seeing everybody with the country was out there jeopardizing their lives and their livelihood to go out there and take care of people. You know what I mean? Whether it's nurses, firefighters, police officers, whoever it was. So we wanted to try to give some sort of something back to them in appreciation for everything they do for society.
Yeah, which makes total sense, and it's win-win for everybody involved. You know, I just think that's a good thing, that a lot of people don't think about these type of things that you're employing in your business that are unique to your listing strategies. So do you leverage social media platforms to enhance the visibility and appeal of your property listings? And if so, how are you currently leveraging them?
So I'm fortunate enough I have a full-time marketing director who does all this for me. So that's probably a question we want to bring him on for. But in this instance, I'll answer it obviously the best of my ability. But I mean, look, he utilizes every sort of platform there is, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Google, Zillow, Realtor.com, Homes.com. You know what I mean? That's why we're able to have somebody that has that sort of background and knowledge that can utilize every sort of social media platform there is to push real estate.
Do you find, now this again might be a question for your marketing person, but do you kind of find that your people are on one particular platform more than another? I mean, are you gearing more towards say Facebook because that trends, you know, towards older clientele? Does Instagram kind of fit where you're looking for? Maybe somewhere like a TikTok now. You know, I know you said you spread yourself all over those platforms, but, you know, do you find in particular that your people are one place or another?
So we see is, look, you know, I mean, all these platforms are utilized by different clientele. But we can see in this instance different because you can't really advertise on any of these platforms on demographic wise. But in this instance, you see age wise, targeted. You know what I mean? In this instance, look, video is the wave of the future. And that's the one thing. If you're a real estate agent or in the real estate field, you need to be implementing some sort of video into your marketing strategy. But in that avenue, we're seeing that, you know what I mean, there's usually a younger demographic that's more on TikTok, that might be more on YouTube in this instance because they're more video geared. We're seeing more, maybe a little bit older is more on, or elderly in Facebook and Instagram. So we're seeing that instance. We're seeing just the avenue of age wise, but in this instance, you never know what the age is of somebody's purchasing or selling a home.
Isn't it funny how things change on social media? Like we're all we're all on Facebook, even going back to MySpace days, which I'm probably dating myself at this point. But one thing I like to do when I'm out on listings is take out my phone and I'll go to, and the reason why I ask this question is I will take out my phone and a lot of times go to the social media platform where I think they are. And that may be, usually Instagram with me. I'm going to Instagram. I'm showing them a video profile, a reel on a property listing of mine, right? And show them what I do and how we do it, because I want them to actually see it on the platform. But if they are a little bit older, I might go to Facebook and do that. Or I may go to YouTube, like you had mentioned, and do that. One place I am not on is TikTok, because I always thought that skewed younger, but now TikTok, everybody's got TikTok now. So even I'm behind on that. So that's why I asked that question.
If you're going to Rajiv's house beforehand to see if he wants to list his house, you might want to go look and see if he's in your top 6 on MySpace.
I know, man. And Rajiv actually lives right near me. So I know exactly where Rajiv lives and I send him stuff all the time. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So, speaking of kind of out of the box thinking, right? Could you discuss any out-of-the-box strategies that you've employed with sellers recently that has given you good results?
So, had a listing recently that was a little bit of an interested sell. And actually, we've had a couple recently. One of them we had was new construction. We weren't really gaining any traffic. So we actually utilized strictly an ad for the property and pushed it through, how you mentioned video. We utilize and push it through video on Instagram and also on TikTok, just to generate an avenue of, because the first thing anybody's looking at, especially when it ties to new construction, everybody watches HGTV now. So in this instance, we had a lot of HG finishes with it being brand new construction. We're able to push that as just another outside of the marketing strategy box that we did and utilized. So that's something we did. And in instance, there's always something new you can be doing. In this instance, I understand that not all times of the year, maybe your phone's going to ring off the hook. But in this instance, you can always continue to keep working and moving forward.
At this point in time, people have become so creative with the ways that they market. I'm almost in awe at some of the agents nationwide where you see an idea and you're like, God, that is such a great and simple idea. Usually it's on social media now, but I think we ever have to be creative and thinking about new creative processes to get more listings sold and to stand out amongst, everybody that's out there selling real estate at this point. So, with all that said, the utilization of local data is going to be employed into everything that we do in order to get a home sold. So how do you utilize local data to guide your listing strategies and better target potential buyers?
So what we consistently do is when we send out a monthly newsletter once a month, what we do is we break down, in our instance, like I said, our main office is in Mount Laurel. So we'll target Burlington County, the amount of just listed, just sold, not only this month, this quarter, but also this time last year. So at this point, you can see the market in the current state. You're also able to see the interest level currently, last quarter, and you can also see last year. So the buyer can see in this instance, look, if I'm buying this house today as opposed to a year ago, I can see the difference in my monthly payment on a particular price point. But I can also see in this instance how much more equity I would have acquired over the last 12 months.
Well, you do a lot of, your team does your tri-state, right? So you do some Delaware, some PA, you do the majority of your work in New Jersey. But like when you go into the city as opposed to Mount Laurel, are you using a different listing strategy in different places? Because, with the pandemic, everywhere was strong for the first couple of years. And then Philly started to trail off a little bit, but the suburbs of Philly remain strong. So do you find yourself using different listing strategies in different states and different areas? How do you approach that?
So usually listing strategy depends more on price point. That's what I've always been. You know what I mean? Regardless of the area, you're always going to cater to specifics in an area on how you're advertising. But to me, it really comes down to price point, because obviously you're selling a house that's multi-million dollars as opposed to a house that's $200,000. You're going to advertise in different areas. You know what I mean? In this instance, you know what I mean? That's really going to break down and see where you need to implement your marketing dollars and where it makes the most sense.
So how do you go? All right, so let's talk about that. When you have a multi-million dollar listing, like you have something big, are you putting it into publications? Are you trying to kind of spend more money in I guess different avenues of marketing? Because I know when I have a listing that's high end, same as you, I do things a little bit differently. So what do you mean, or what do you distinguish yourself with your marketing when it comes to higher end listings?
So it depends. Like you mentioned, publications. If you have a property down at the shore, you're going to advertise at publications where individuals are either at the shore, or that's a highly traveled area for them during the summertime. In this instance, you're not going to see an advertise in the shore, but you're going to advertise in a magazine in New York. Just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So to make sure you gear towards the area that you're interested in. Just in this instance also too. I mean, you're not going to sell a house in Central Jersey and utilize Philadelphia magazines. You know what I mean? Or Philadelphia publication. Doesn't make any sense. So, you know what I mean? You're right to strategically market based off the area that you're marketing that property in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what's one thing that has helped to boost your listing's attractiveness more than any other tool in your listing toolbox, would you say?
That's a good question. That's one of me. Now you're making me think about it. But no, in this instance, to me, it just really to me, it's about being consistent. You know what I mean? Having the same tools available and doing them, using them properly for every listing. You know what I mean? Having the same photographer. You know what I mean? That has the same angles, your sellers can expect. You know what I mean? If you're able to implement floor plans, 3D virtual tours, Matterports. I mean, I've really been using them recently. Aerial shots. You know what I mean? And just the same market plan in place, whether it's through social media, direct mail, website, email targeting. I mean, there's just one after the next. To me, it's just about consistency.
Well, it's like when you go to a restaurant, right? They always talk about the number one thing, especially with fast food, that they always want is consistency.
Yeah.
Because they want you to have your process down. You're getting the same meal every time, right? Yeah. And I think for us, it's kind of the same thing. We're just adding little tweaks to that menu every time that we, head out to a listing appointment. We might have a new trick in our bag. But I like what you're saying there in terms of your consistency and having a process that works, and you can show a seller that works, and you're just kind of wash, rinse, repeat kind of thing. Am I right?
Exactly. It's the same thing. It's like you look at this as you mentioned restaurant. So if you go to a restaurant, there's one chef today on a Monday, different chef on a Tuesday, different chef on a Wednesday, different chef on a Thursday. You're getting a different product. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole point, is you want consistency. Because the last thing you want to do is be dropping the ball from one agent to the next, to the next, to the next for each of these sellers, because you're dealing with people's livelihood here. A lot of homeowners, this is their main source of equity in life, not just in the housing business. Some people might not have a 401k. They might work for themselves. They might not have money set aside for stocks. I mean, they might have to refinance their house multiple times just to pay for kids' educations. So in this instance, you have to have the proper product in place to get the proper results for your client.
This is the biggest thing that they're going to be dealing with. And so you have to be prepared for every single angle, especially on, higher end listings, right? They are a little bit more stressful. They're a little bit more involved. The clientele can be a little bit more controlling, I guess you could say. You have to have your processes down and make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. So I wanted to actually ask you, doing the amount of transactions that you and your team do. So you're talking about hundreds potentially of transactions per year.
Yeah.
So with that said, you have to be using some of your listings to get new listings, right?
Yes.
Listings beget listings, right? So how do you ensure that your listings resonate with future potential sellers and lead to more listings for you down the line?
I mean, so obviously when we send out monthly newsletters, you can have just solds in there. Obviously you can direct mail. So if you're trying to farm a particular area when you're showing sellers locally that you're consistently selling properties in a neighborhood and you're doing it with record setting sales numbers, you're starting to become the neighborhood expert over and over again. So those are great ways to implement that. Obviously websites, social media. A lot of people post on township pages every time they have a new listing. They put a new listing under contract or they sell a new listing. There's just so many ways for you now. We're fortunate because we have the internet. Years ago, we didn't have the internet, so we weren't able to implement all these strategies. That's why, in turn, agents are now able to sell more and more listings.
In certain neighborhoods, are you doing farming of any kind when it comes to your listings? Are you doing circle prospecting at all when it comes to your listings? Is there a place where you're planting your flag and saying, yeah, I got this on lockdown here, because of the amount of business you do?
So traditionally, when you do circle prospecting, you have avenues. Agents a lot of times use Cold Resource Center.
Yeah.
So obviously, it's something that's free source from the company. That what you're able to do is you're able to circle prospect X amount of homeowners around the area. So traditionally, what we also do as well is when we have agents that are going to be hosting an open house at a new listing, we'll usually have them come stop by the property a couple of days beforehand, drop off door hangers on the surrounding properties local. There are 15, 25 houses. Now, obviously, if it's an instance where you're more located in an area that's more farm, in this instance, and every house is a mile apart from each other, that's a little bit more difficult. That's when you're able to utilize more direct mailing. So it's a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. What advice would you give to agents looking to innovate their listing strategies in order to gain them more business?
So the last thing you mentioned was obviously listings acquire more listings, but every agent who's been successful started in some instance where they did not have any listings. So to me, my biggest recommendation is attach yourself to the hip, at least for part of the day, part of the week, part of the month, to whoever that successful agent is in your office. Because if you're able to do that, you can look. The most likely, and I do this a lot, you give people the authority. If you want to market one of our listings, you're more than welcome to. It'll show in this instance in the general eye of the public how effective and resourceful and successful they are in real estate because they're promoting a listing. Whether it's theirs or not, a lot of times the general public won't know that unless obviously they do a little bit more research. Well, my recommendation is push a top agent listing in your office, be able to sit with them. Maybe see if you can go on a listing presentation with them, pick up some sort of skill set. Every agent's different on how they sell, and especially on how they present. Some people, they'll push the team. Others will push the company. Others will push marketing. Some will talk about experience, pricing, the market locally, the market nationally. Everybody's different. Well, my recommendation, the biggest thing is, first of all, attach yourself, like I said, to the agent in your office. Second to me is, in this instance, social media. You mentioned out west. My recommendation is usually what happens out west eventually comes out east. And that's where everything starts. So a lot of times we'll follow very successful agents out on the West Coast to implement new strategies and new styles into our listing presentation.
I love that. And you're so right. It does gravitate east. I don't know why everything starts out west. It just seems like they're just ahead of us. And a year later, now we're employing their strategies. So before we get out of here, you have a large team, and you and I were talking about this before we started, that being a team leader and training agents is a full-time job in itself. So what do you teach your agents when they're brand new or they have little experience? What are you telling them when it comes to their listing presentations? Are you sitting down with them and talking about, a certain strategy that you do, or do you like them to have their own voice and kind of figure out what they're doing when they go out to the properties? Like, do you practice with them? Do you have scripts? What are you telling your agents when it comes to gaining listing business?
The first thing we have new agents, I recommend that when we go through a strategy, when we have a new agent, we have them go through a whole avenue shadow program. in our throughout our team. Whether they're sitting there and seeing a buyer consultation, being present on a property showing, hosting an open house, attending a closing, going to a listing presentation. But my recommendation on a listing presentation, you sit with a couple different agents. So you can see a couple different strategies because not everybody's the same. But my recommendation is anytime you have a new agent, making sure that we still attend with them. So obviously that listing is presented properly and is successful in signing a listing agreement. But my thing is I always tell the agent, I'm like, when you're implementing this listing, you want to acquire as much information as possible. Because I always say, put yourself in the shoes of another agent. And a lot of times, even if an agent doesn't have the experience, my recommendation is to go back to what are two things that you can do without having zero experience. Read and listen. I can't tell you how many agents we deal with, you know what I mean, when they call up in a listing and don't read the MLS. Because majority of the information is already existing in the MLS. So we're going to try to save that agent and their client a ton of time by answering proper questions.
Wow, that's such a great point. I always say that you want to approach every listing presentation like you're a lawyer, right? You're gathering all your evidence, and that might be, the stuff that you find on public record, the stuff that you find on Google, wherever you're getting, agent metrics, whatever you're gaining knowledge from about this property, you want to make sure that you're gaining that more than any other agent out there. You're doing your research, you're prepared. And like you said, you're going out to this property to listen, but then also geared with the knowledge to be able to handle any objection that may come down the line. And so it's kind of almost like similar to what you're saying now. So yeah, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, research is key because you want to be able to get all that information up front. You know what I mean, especially if you're on a listing appointment where the individual you're meeting with has inherited a property. Yeah, I mean, because the last thing you want to do is find out there's additional liens, forbearances. You know what I mean? In this instance, mortgage amounts where the seller ends up having to go into a short sale as opposed to traditional sales. So that's you as an agent having that experience to acquire all that information from the beginning. Because that's our job, like you mentioned in this instance. Acquire all the information as an attorney, so you're able to act on it, because the last thing you want to be able to do is be behind the 8 ball instead of in front of it.
Now, I know before we get out of here, I got one last question for you. And I know that, you're no stranger to podcasts, but you're also no stranger to being a TV host for American Dream TV. So with all that said, number one, how much time do you spend personally in the makeup chair before each episode, or did you? And number two, how many takes? Because I will tell you, I know all the hours that are involved with this, and my videographer, I think, sometimes wants to murder me because there's like one word that would trip me up on camera that we'd have to do like 15 takes over. So I know the time involved. So can you answer those two questions?
Well, first of all, I don't think there's enough makeup in this world to make any difference from whether I take it on before or after camera. But in this instance, I mean, look, there's sometimes we're fortunate enough, look, you get things on the first take. There's sometimes you were taking them on the 9th take. The whole avenue is just same thing with real estate, having a plan before you go into it, executing it, getting out there and trying to do the best for your clients.
No, man, that's a perfect answer. That's a TV worthy answer right there. So, well, Chris, it was great to get to know you a little bit and having you on the podcast. Much continued success to you and your team out there. And hopefully our paths will be crossing at some point. I know this is the first time we had the opportunity to actually meet each other, sit down and do this together. I don't know how we haven't met yet, but it's nice to finally get to know you a little bit. Absolutely.
Look, I want to thank you for having me. It was great meeting you as well. And obviously, if there's anything you need from us, you know how to get in touch with us.
All right, Chris. Thanks, man. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks to Chris Twardy for being on the podcast this week. Chris had a lot of great information to share with us. Here's just a few things that I took away from our conversation together. Chris talks about his preparation and his consistency, and those are two things that we all can control, right? We want to be as prepared as we possibly can, know your local market stats, know the area, know the price point, and know your strategy when you go out to these properties. And if you're a newer agent listening to this podcast, Chris talks about two things that you can do right off the bat when you go out to a property and meet with the seller, and that is read and listen. So the first takeaway is be prepared, do your research, and be prepared to listen. Chris also talks about his consistency when he goes out to meet with sellers. You want to have your process down so you are consistent in the way that you approach each listing appointment. Now, you may have a different strategy, like Chris says, when he talks about different price points may entail different strategies on his part, but the process remains the same no matter what he does. You want it to be second nature, so it just flows with confidence from you when you go out to your listing appointments. And if you're in the early stages of your career where you haven't gotten a successful process down for yourself, shadow somebody in your office that is highly successful. Ask if you can go out on a listing appointment with them. That may be someone that you respect, maybe it's your team leader in the office, but shadow those who have done it before and have been successful at it. Well, that's it for the podcast this week. We will be back in another couple of weeks with a new topic, a new guest, and as always, if you want to hear something that we haven't covered yet, please reach out to me at jason.ostrowski@foxroach.com. And if you haven't liked or subscribed to the podcast yet or left us a review, please do so. It helps us to reach more people. Once again, this is Jason Ostrowski saying stay safe out there, stay selling, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Everything Real Estate Podcast.